The night they carried the king in half dead, I was the only person in the healing hall too unimportant to be sent out of the room. I want to begin there, because everyone tells this story wrong. They tell it as though the king was saved by the great healers, by the war surgeons with their clean hands and their certainty. And it is true that those men stood around his bed all that long night. They stood. I have noticed, across a life spent at the bottom of rooms, that important people do a great deal of standing at the moments that matter most. I was 24 years old, and I kept the night fires in the healing hall, which made me furniture, which meant that when the linen ran out and someone had to go down on her knees in the dark at the foot of the bed and actually close the wound that was killing him, it was me, because furniture does not need to be asked, and furniture does not need to be thanked. He never saw my face. I have thought about that more often than is good for me. The lamps had guttered low, and the great surgeons had stepped back to argue over him, the way men argue when they are frightened, and he was far past seeing anything at all, fever-blind, his eyes open and fixed on nothing. I knelt in that dark and did the work with my hands, because my hands were the only ones still doing it. I knew who he was, of course. Everyone knew the king had ridden to the border, and everyone knew what had come back. Halvar of the Iron Reach, the wolf who had held the mountain passes against 3 packs and a hard winter. The king, they said, could not be killed, which is the sort of thing people say, I have found. Right up until the night it is very nearly disproved, on a cot that smells of blood and tallow and other men's fear. The deep cut ran along his side, under the ribs, and it had been packed badly in the field and left too long, and it was the kind of wound that does not kill you with a flourish. It kills you slowly, from the inside, while everyone is busy admiring the bigger and more dramatic ones. The surgeons were busy with the dramatic ones, so I cleaned the quiet one. I have small hands and a steady stomach, and a way of going very still inside when a thing has to be done. And I cleaned it, and closed it, and sat with my thumb pressed to the place that wanted to keep bleeding until it remembered how to stop. His wolf was in the room. I should explain that, because it matters later more than anything else does. A gravely wounded alpha cannot always hold his shift, and Halvar could not hold his. He flickered, all that night, between the man and the great dark wolf, the way a candle gutters between flame and smoke. And in the worst hour, near dawn, when the man had gone somewhere I could not follow him, the wolf surfaced, enormous and shaking and barely conscious, and it turned its head and it looked at me. I want to be precise about this, because I have had 3 years to be imprecise about it, and I am tired of lying. The wolf looked at me. Not the way a beast looks at a stranger, the way you look at the one face in a crowd you have been searching for. It pushed its great head a half-inch toward my hands, toward the smell of me, I understood later. Yarrow and tallow, and the bitter green of the salve I crushed myself, and it breathed me in, once, long and deliberate, like a man learning something by heart, and then the fever took it back under, and I went on with my work, and I told myself, a tired girl in a dark room imagines things. By morning he would live. By morning the great surgeons had remembered they had been there all along. I let them. That is the part no one understands, so let me say it plainly while it is only you and me. When the household asked who had closed the king's side, the senior healer, a decent enough man who had genuinely done good work on the worse wounds, said he supposed it had been a joint effort, and looked vaguely at the corner where the Nightfire girl stood, and could not produce my name because he did not know it. And I said nothing. I gathered the bloodied linen and I carried it down to be burned, and I said nothing. And I have never once regretted it, and I will tell you before the end exactly why. For now, know only this. I had saved the king's life, and I had decided, on purpose, with my eyes open, that he would never learn it was me. His wolf had other plans. The first time I saw Halvar on his feet was 3 months later, in the Great Hall, on the day he received the envoys from the free packs of the south. I was not meant to be there. I was carrying a basket of fresh rushes for the floor, which is precisely the sort of errand they give a person they need to be invisible. And I had nearly made it along the cold edge of the hall and out the servants' door when the whole room changed. You learn to feel a room from the bottom of it. I felt this one go wrong. The low talk stopped. The envoys froze mid-bow, and at the high end of the hall, the king, restored now, upright, terrible and well, wearing his recovery like armour, went still in the middle of a sentence, and his head came up, and he turned, slow, scenting the air like the wolf he carried inside him. He was looking for something. The whole court watched their king stop a council of war to look for something, and not one of them knew what, and neither, from the careful blankness of his face, did he. I did the sensible thing. I put my head down and aimed for the door. I did not make it. The doors at the far end of the hall opened not by any hand, they simply gave, the way a thing gives when something large and certain has decided it will pass, and the king's wolf came through them at a dead, silent run, scattering envoys like startled birds, and it crossed the entire length of that hall, past every lord and lady and warrior who outranked me by the whole height of the world, and it stopped in front of a girl with a basket of rushes, and it put its enormous grey head against my hands, and it would not move. The hall made a sound I have never heard a room make before or since, a sort of indrawn breath shared by 100 people who have all, at the same instant, understood that they are watching something that is not supposed to be possible. Because a wolf does not lie. Everyone in that hall knew it the way they knew their own names. The most feared animal in the Iron Reach had crossed a council of war to lay its head against the lowest person in the room. And there is only one thing that means, and the meaning of it went through that court like cold water. "Move," I whispered to the wolf, which was, I grant you, not my finest hour of strategy. "Please, you have the wrong girl. You have absolutely the wrong girl." The wolf leaned its whole weight against my hands and breathed me in, and did not have the wrong girl, and knew it, and was, I think, rather pleased with itself. And then Halvar reached us. He came down the length of his own hall with the particular speed of a man who has lost control of a situation in public and intends to get it back before anyone is sure he ever lost it. Up close, he was nothing like the broken thing I had knelt over in the dark. He was all hard certainty and winter and command, and his eyes went from his impossible wolf to my face, which he had never seen, which meant nothing to him at all, and I watched him fail, completely, to recognise me. "What is your name?" he said. Not a question, a man retrieving order. I have, on my good days, a quick tongue. This was not one of my good days. "Orla, Majesty." "And what are you to my wolf, Orla, that he should cross my hall for you?" And there it was, the chance to be saved, the chance to say it. It was me. It was my hands. I closed the wound under your ribs while the great men stood and argued. Your wolf knows me because I am the reason you are alive to ask. The whole court was holding its breath for it. And I want you to understand that I had thought about this exact moment for 3 months, lying on my pallet listening to the night fires. And I had decided what I would do. And so I looked the king of the Iron Reach in the eye, and I lied. "Nothing, Majesty," I said. "I am no one. I think your wolf has confused me with someone who matters." Here is the truth I would not give the king, the one the whole court would spend the following weeks failing to guess. I had grown up in a border village that the king's grandfather had once owed a debt to. I will not bore you with the whole of it. I will tell you only that I watched, as a child, what happens to small people when the great remember they owe them something. The gratitude comes first, and it is real, and it is warm, and it is brief. Then comes the discomfort of the debt, because no powerful person enjoys being indebted to a nobody. It itches at them. Then comes the quiet work of making the debt smaller than it was, of misremembering it, of resenting the person who is owed for the crime of being owed. I watched my own grandmother go from the woman who saved a lord's son to the woman the lord's house could not quite look at, and then to a story, and then to nothing. I had decided, somewhere around the age of 9, that I would never in my life be owed by a powerful man. It is the only thing I have ever been truly certain of. I would rather be no one freely than someone on another person's terms. And the cruelty of that night 3 months past was that I had saved a king without meaning to, and the only way to keep my one certainty was to give away the one thing that might have lifted me out of the dark forever. So you see, when I told Halvar I was no one, it was not modesty, and it was not fear. It was the single most stubborn act of self-respect I have ever committed. I just did not expect it to start a war. The man who started the war was Lord Varric. Varric was the king's spy master, which is a polite word for the person whose whole craft is assuming the worst about everyone and being correct often enough to be kept. He had spent the 3 months of the king's recovery quietly arranging an alliance, a marriage, in fact, between Halvar and a daughter of the southern Pax, the very envoys who had been bowing in the hall, because Varric believed, not without cause, that a king who has nearly died needs heirs and walls and treaties, and not a mystery. And here was the mystery. A wolf bonding in open court to an unknown woman with no rank and no name, and, most alarming of all to a spy master, 3 months of unexplained proximity to the king's wounded body in the dark. He found me that same evening. He did not threaten. Men like Varric do not threaten. They explain, kindly, the shape of the trap you are already in. A woman no one can account for, he said, tended the king in the dark on the night he was most vulnerable. And now the king's own wolf has marked her in front of the southern envoys on the very day I was to seal a peace. You can see how it looks. He folded his hands. I do not think you are an assassin, Orla. For what it is worth, I do not. But I have built my life on what things look like, and this looks like a planted blade that has been waiting 3 months in the king's own household. I would be failing him not to put you to the question. You understand. It is nothing personal. It is simply that you have made yourself impossible to explain, and I cannot afford anything I cannot explain. That was his first move, and it was a clean one. By naming me a possible blade, he made my silence into evidence. The more I insisted I was no one, the more I looked like someone hiding something. My one certainty that I would never claim what I was owed had become the very rope they would hang me with. I have to pause here a moment, because the trap had just closed around me as neatly as you have seen, and I would like you to sit in it with me before I tell you how it broke. So while we are here, in the dark of it, when this is done, tell me whether you would have lied the way I did, knowing they could turn it against you. And if you would like the next of these stories to find you here in the dark, you could follow along. It costs nothing, and the company helps. There. Now let me tell you what the king did with the night I spent in that cell. He had me taken the next morning, quietly. A locked room off the gatehouse, the kind they keep for people who have not yet been decided about. What I did not know, what I could not have known in the dark of that room, was that the king had spent the night not sleeping. I learned the rest of it later, in pieces, mostly from Edric, who was the king's second and the only man in that house brave enough to tell me the unflattering parts. He told me that Halvar had gone back to his chambers after the scene in the hall in a fury, determined to forget the whole impossible business, to let Varric make it disappear, to marry his southern bride and rule his recovered kingdom and never again be made to look like a man whose own wolf had a better idea than he did. He told me the king had dismissed me in his own mind, the way he had dismissed me 100 unknowing times before. The Nightfire girl, the furniture, the nothing. And he told me that the wolf would not let him. All that night, Edric said, the king could not settle. His wolf paced him from the inside, restless to the edge of pain, dragging him again and again to the one thing his pride had refused in the hall. And somewhere in the small hours, the king gave up fighting it long enough to ask his wolf, the way an alpha can, in the wordless place where they meet, the only question that mattered. Why her? Why this one? Why, out of every soul in my kingdom, would you cross a hall for a girl with a basket of rushes? And the wolf, Edric said, gave him the answer the man had buried so deep he had forgotten he was carrying it. Not a word, a smell. Yarrow and tallow and bitter green. The smell of a pair of hands in the dark on the worst night of his life. The smell of the one thing that had kept him in the world when the great men were only standing around watching him leave it. The king remembered being saved. He had simply never known by whom. His wolf had known all along and had been trying to tell him since the hall, and the man had been too proud to listen. Edric said the king was out of his chambers before the wolf had finished. He said he had never seen Halvar move like that, not in battle, not anywhere, and that the king went not to the council, not to Varric, but straight down through his own holdfast to a locked room off the gatehouse, and that he tore the bar off the door with his bare hands, rather than wait the 4 seconds it would have taken to find the key. I was sitting in the dark with my back to the wall when the light came in. He filled the doorway. For a moment he did not speak. He looked at me the way he had looked for something in the hall, except now he had found it, and the finding had undone him. The terrible certainty was gone out of his face. What was left was the face of a man who has just understood that he owes everything he is to a person he tried, the day before, to have erased. "It was you," he said. His voice was not even. "In the dark. The wound under my ribs. The great surgeons did not close it. You did. My wolf has been trying to tell me since the hall, and I would not." He stopped. His jaw moved. "I dismissed you. Yesterday. In front of my court. I let Varric take you. The woman who put her hands in my side and kept me in the world, and I let them lock her in the dark like a blade." I got to my feet, because I would not have this conversation sitting on a floor. "You did not know." "My wolf knew." "Your wolf," I said, "has fewer reasons than you do to be careful. That is not a virtue, Majesty. That is just a shorter memory of being hurt." That stopped him. I have noticed it is the true things that stop powerful men, never the clever ones. "Why?" he said at last, quietly. "Why would you save my life and then lie to my face about it? Do you know what I would have given you? Anything. A name, a place, land. You could have walked out of that hall a lady of this house, and instead you told me you were no one." And here was the moment I had been certain of since I was 9 years old. So I told him the truth, the whole of it, the village and the debt and my grandmother and the long, slow way the great unmake the people they owe. I told him I would rather be no one freely than someone on his terms. I told him I had not lied to protect myself from him. I had lied to protect the one thing I had ever owned outright, which was the right not to be his to repay. I do not want to be the woman the king owes, I said. I have watched what happens to her. She does not get a happy ending. She gets a pension and a long silence and a place no one will quite meet her eyes. He was quiet for a long time. Then I will owe you nothing, he said. I laughed. I could not help it. You cannot simply decide that. You owe me your life. It is not the sort of thing you can hand back. No. He took a step into the room and stopped, the way a man stops when he has learned that closing distance is not always the way to reach someone. But there is a difference between a debt and a choice. A debt is a thing I would discharge to be free of it. A choice is a thing I make again every morning because I want to. His eyes did not leave mine. I do not want to repay you, Orla. I want to know you. I have spent 3 months haunted by a smell and a memory I could not place. And now that I have a face to put to it, I find I am not grateful. Gratitude is too small. I am undone. There is a difference, and I am asking you to let me prove I know it. It was, I will admit, an alarmingly good answer. But the world was not finished with us, because the world never is. And Varric had not built his life on what things look like only to lose the game in a gatehouse cell. He came to the council the next day with the only weapon he had left, and he used it well. He could not now name me an assassin. The king had made the truth of the healing hall known, and a woman who saves the king is awkward to hang. So Varric did the cleverer thing. He stood before the full council and the southern envoys, and he made me a different kind of threat. He reminded the king, gently, ruinously, of the alliance. He reminded the hall that the southern pacts had come in good faith to seal a peace through a marriage, that the king had given his word, that a kingdom only 3 months out of its near death could not afford to humiliate 3 packs at once over a still-room healer the king happened to feel he owed. He turned my rescue into the king's leash. Honour the debt, Varric said, by all means. Pension her, ennoble her, thank her in front of everyone. But do not throw away a peace your people will bleed for on a sentiment. The king is not a man who can afford to choose with his heart. He never has been. That is the price of the crown. And it nearly worked. I watched it nearly work. I watched the council nod and the envoys wait, and I watched Halvar feel the full weight of the crown come down on him exactly where Varric had aimed it. A king cannot afford to choose with his heart. It is the oldest and the truest thing anyone had said in that hall, and it nearly took him. So Halvar did the thing that I am told the Iron Reach still talks about. He came down off the dais. In front of the southern envoys, in front of Varric, in front of the whole council that had just agreed he could not afford his own heart, the king of the Iron Reach came down to the floor of his hall where the rest of us stood. And he stood among us, level, uncrowned in every way that the crown is a height. And he spoke not as a king handing down a decree, but as a man making an accounting in public, which is the most expensive thing a powerful person can do. You are right, he said to Varric, that a king cannot afford to choose with his heart. My father told me the same. I have ruled by it for 9 years. I nearly died by it 3 months ago, surrounded by men too careful to put their hands in my side. He let that land. This woman was not too careful. She has never, in her life, been too careful about the right things. She closed the wound your surgeons would not touch, and then she refused every reward I could have given her, because she would not be owned even by gratitude. You have all spent a day calling that suspicious. I have spent a day learning it is the only entirely honourable thing I have witnessed since I took this throne. His voice did not rise. It did not need to. I will keep faith with the Southern Pax in every way that does not require me to give my name to someone I do not love and withhold it from someone I do. If that costs me the alliance, then I will pay for it in the coin kings are supposed to pay in, which is their own blood and their own borders, and not in the life of the one person in this hall who asked me for nothing. The Southern envoys, to their lasting credit, were not insulted. The eldest of them, a grey woman with a soldier's hands, looked at me for a long moment and looked at the wolf leaning against my side and said that her Pax did not make peace with men who could be talked out of their own hearts, and that she would carry home the news that the Iron Reach was ruled by one who could not, and that this was a better foundation for a treaty than a wedding. Varric, I am told, did not speak again in council for a month. He kept his post. Halvar said a king who surrounds himself only with people who tell him what he wants to hear is exactly the king who ends up bleeding out while the careful men argue, and that he would rather keep the man who had been wrong out loud than replace him with someone agreeable. I have come, slowly, to think he was right. The kiss, when it finally came quietly, the way the truest things in my life have always come quietly. It was a fortnight later, on the cold walk above the orchard, and he had been talking. He talked, once he started, like a man emptying a room he had kept locked for years, and he stopped and looked at me as though I were a debt he had stopped trying to pay and started simply wanting to keep. When he kissed me, what broke open in me was not heat. It was the unbearable relief of being chosen by the man, and not only known by the wolf. Chosen with the eyes open, in the daylight, by the one who had every reason of state to choose otherwise, and chose me anyway. I had spent my whole life making certain no one could want me on terms I had not set, and here, at last, was a want that had walked off its own dais to meet me on the floor. I am writing this 3 years on, from a window seat in the King's Library that the household now simply calls mine, while down in the yard my husband is losing an argument with his own wolf about whether it is permitted to sleep across the nursery door. The wolf is winning, as the wolf always wins, because the wolf was right about everything before either of us was. Varric dined with us last week and told me, dryly, that I remain the single most inconvenient thing ever to happen to the security of the Iron Reach, and that he has decided to be glad of it. From Varric, that is very nearly a love letter. A messenger came in the spring from my old border village. They had heard, the way the far edges of a country always finally hear, that the Night Fire Girl had married the Wolf King. They did not ask for anything. They only wanted to know if I remembered them. I sent back word that I remembered all of it, that I had seen to it the village would never again be a place where the great forget the small, and that I had named our daughter for my grandmother, who saved a lord's son once and got nothing for it, and deserved a granddaughter who got everything. I think about her often now, in this warm room that is mine, and was always going to be mine the moment I decided it would be no one's gift. How close I came to being a story that ends in silence. How a wolf with a longer memory than its king once crossed a hall full of his betters to lay its head against my hands. Because instinct is not fooled by rank, and the body remembers who kept it in the world, even when pride would rather not. So tell me, and I will read every one of them. Would you have lied in that hall the way I did? Would you rather be no one freely than someone on another's terms? And wherever you are tonight, whatever you have quietly done for someone who never learned it was you, I hope something with a long memory and no patience for your modesty is on its way across a crowded room to find you. Follow along, and the next one will. I will leave the fire lit. After all, the careful ones only ever stand around the bed. It is the rest of us who put our hands in the dark.